Epic Games Store. It is a launcher that's been out since December of 2018, so it's been about 2.5 years since the release of that digital storefront, a competitor to Steam. And while there are, some good elements to it, like the higher revenue cut for developers and the free games that they give out every week, it's also faced some controversy due to the way they are securing third-party timed exclusives, and because the store itself and the launcher itself are just so bare bones in their features and fall woefully short of Steam's own offering. And since the release of Epic Games Store, people have been wondering, how has it been performing? Well, many of you might also know that Epic has been facing a legal battle with Apple because Epic believes that Apple is engaging in antitrust and anti-competitive ways with their store policies and with the way they're so restrictive about the way developers can release apps on iOS, and how they're basically forced to go through Apple's own store and shell out that fee, among other things. Well, part of that lawsuit also involved looking into Epic's finances and the performance of Epic Games Store, and the lawsuit kind of brought some of that to light, as reported by PC Gamer here in an article published 2 days ago on April 9th, 2021, and the headline of this article reads, "Epic will lose over $300 million on Epic Games Store exclusives," which goes to show that so far this endeavor has yet to be profitable, though when you do start a new business endeavor, it is certainly not always going to be profitable within the first few years. Whether it does eventually become profitable, that remains to be seen. But in this early stage where Epic Games Store has only been out for a little over 2 years, well, they've been pushing quite aggressively for exclusivity deals and giving away free games every week, and that comes at a cost. In fact, according to PC Gamer, the exact cost is that Epic has committed around $444 million to Epic Games Store exclusivity deals in 2020 alone. So if you take into account 2019, that number's probably significantly higher. More precisely, that's $444 million on minimum guarantees for games that release on the Epic Games Store but stay off Steam for a year. And what that means is basically Epic is just giving developers funding so that they feel safer about releasing their games. Even if they end up being a flop, that funding guarantees that the development studio won't go under, at least if they're indie developers. Whereas with the bigger companies that Epic is partnered with and are giving money to, well, I mean, they already got more than enough money, but they're getting more money out of Epic exclusivity deals. They don't actually need to partake in this deal, but money is the way these corporations think, so, what do you expect? And we have seen certain examples of just how much money Epic is willing to give to developers that they partner with. So Remedy Games Control, for example, was granted $10.45 million from Epic in order to release the game exclusively on Epic for a limited time. No doubt there were bigger and smaller deals in between, but the totality of all of that for the minimum guarantees was $444 million in 2020 alone, which is pretty significant. Now, Epic did say in its end-of-year report that the total amount that players have spent on the Epic Games Store roughly amounted to $700 million in 2020. That, of course, also includes Fortnite spending. But when it comes to player spending money on third-party games featured on Epic Games Store, that only accounted for $265 million of that $700 million spending, and you can already see that this is less than the $444 million that Epic spent on these minimum guarantees. So they actually did lose money in 2020, and according to Apple's learnings, Apple claims that Epic is going to eat at least $330 million in unrecouped costs from minimum guarantees alone if you also consider 2019's sales. And it is projected that the losses will increase through 2021, with projections saying that we might be looking at less than $600 million in losses that Epic has to recoup to make this a profitable endeavor. Numbers are further broken down, scrolling down here, where PC Gamer talks about Apple's estimates based on the data that they've seen. They relayed that Epic lost $181 million on the Epic Games Store in 2019, a projected loss of $273 million last year, 2020, and expect another projected loss of $139 million this year, 2021, which adds up to that estimated $600 million loss that Apple is roughly expecting. And for the cherry on top, Apple pointed out that they don't believe Epic will be profitable with Epic Games Store until 2027. And this is all a combination of both Apple's own projections and information that was disclosed as part of the legal battle that is currently ongoing between the two corporations. And while Apple is painting all of this as if Epic is losing money from this seemingly unsuccessful endeavor, what Epic is saying is that they're investing money for long-term goals, and Epic insists that 12% revenue cut will eventually be enough to sustain the store. Tim Sweeney did admit that currently the Epic Games Store is not profitable in terms of the acquiring of exclusives and that whole aspect. He said EGS is not yet profitable at its current scale and stage of development because it has front-loaded its marketing and user acquisition costs to gain market share. So Apple is saying, look, this is clearly not working. Epic is saying this is just the initial stages. We're spending a lot of money now so that we can set the foundation for long-term gains. Now, whether long-term gains are achievable with Epic Games Store will, of course, depend on what Epic does to draw more people to that storefront, because the majority of folks still use Steam and they still have very little incentive to really transition to Epic Games Store, save for the occasional exclusives and save for the occasional logging in to claim a free game. Most people still prefer the ecosystem of Steam, the features of Steam, and all of the advantages that you get from engaging with Steam. And not to mention that with Steam, because that came sooner, most people have most of their library of games on Steam and would prefer to keep everything under one umbrella, one house, one ecosystem that they're familiar with. And so it's going to take that much more convincing for them to start using Epic Games Store more. For that, Epic Games Store needs to sell them on features and quality of life elements that Epic Games Store currently lacks. And this is something that a lot of people have been discussing on social media. So when IGN tweeted about this reporting, one user said, Epic completely missed why people use Steam in the first place. It's a fleshed out platform, not just a digital market. Steam has groups, forums, Steam Workshop, inventory system support, etc. If Epic is on top of a food chain, then Steam is a whole nother ecosystem entirely. This is among the most liked posts in response to IGN's article, and somebody else did try to play devil's advocate by saying when Steam launched, it also had major losses and didn't have many features. But there's somebody else who aptly pointed out, well, there's one thing they didn't have: competitor services that already had all this stuff. Yes, Steam did launch bare bones, but this was during a time when something like Steam didn't exist, when Steam didn't have competition, and they built up this ecosystem that others can now learn from and adapt if they want to launch their own storefront. If one day I were to decide to establish my own game company and release my own video game console, I wouldn't go back to the 8-bit era just because Nintendo once upon a time also had to start from 8-bit era and build up their technology to where they're now. We have learned so much since the 8-bit era, progressed so much, and so what I'm going to release is using all that knowledge as a console that would compete with the likes of PS5, Xbox, and Switch, rather than excusing the release of dated, kind of featureless products by saying, well, once upon a time other companies also release kind of antiquated featureless products. Whether Epic likes it or not, Steam is their main competition, and Steam has all of these features, and if Epic cannot match Steam on that level, then, you know, there's just gonna be little incentive for those who do enjoy the Steam ecosystem, which is most PC gamers, to make that transition. And somebody else on Twitter echoed similar sentiments with this tweet: Steam came out in 2003. It's like if a new car manufacturer didn't include seatbelts and headlights because they're new to the game. Just because Steam launched bare bones once upon a time doesn't mean that Epic Games Store has to do the same, because so much progress has been made with launcher, so much knowledge has been acquired in terms of what features people enjoy that Epic can leverage, and, you know, they're a big enough company that they can afford to spend more time and money on properly fleshing out the Epic Games Store. But in its current state, it's hard for me to get behind the idea that Epic Games Store so far has been a major threat. That's not to say that Epic Games Store couldn't one day become a major threat for Steam, because over the years they could eventually end up adding all of these features that would make Epic Games Store match Steam or surpass it in its features and functionalities. I don't know, I can't predict the future, but as of right here, right now, Epic still feels woefully lackluster compared to the competitor. And until Epic can overcome that hurdle of making Epic Games Store just a better launcher than Steam, I would suspect that their audience base might not grow fast enough for them to make a profit in the near future from this endeavor. So far, Epic hasn't done a whole lot to inspire a huge amount of confidence in Epic Games Store. A lot of their revenues coming from Fortnite, and just the amount of money players are spending on that game, which eclipses what players have spent on games on Epic Games Store. And one more thing I should highlight is that Tim Sweeney admitted that the numbers are accurate, so he tweeted, "That's right," in response to IGN's tweet about how Epic lost $330 million. In response to all this, Tim Sweeney said, "That's right, it has proven to be a fantastic success in reaching gamers with great games and a fantastic investment into growing the business." And there's the emphasis on that word again, investment. Tim Sweeney is seeing these short-term losses as a vehicle for long-term gains. If this endeavor proves to be successful in the long term, that's the big question mark. That'll define whether this is a fantastic investment or a business move that won't end up being able to compete, and that will ultimately be overshadowed by Steam's currently superior service. On top of the tweet, he also attached an image showing some stats about Epic Games Store's latest performance, noting how there's a total of 160 million plus Epic Games Store PC customers. Again, that also includes Fortnite players. Much of these stats represent also Fortnite players alongside Epic Games Store third-party game sales. 56 million plus monthly active users in December, $700 million spent by PC players on the Epic Games Store, again including Fortnite. $265 million of that spent by players on third-party PC games in the Epic Games Store, with $444 million being spent to acquire timed exclusives and to give out free games. So this aspect definitely comes at a loss. 103 free games, 749 million plus free games claimed, a total value of $2,407 per player, assuming they claimed all of those games. And 77%, what does that say down there? Average score across all free games. So the free games themselves are of decent to high quality. Tim Sweeney says it's a good start. I don't know enough about Epic's business for me to be able to say one way or the other. It is a start, but whether these numbers grow or falter, well, that will largely depend on Epic's strategy moving forward. That will largely depend on the enhancements that they bring to the Epic Games Store, and if they can match Steam's offering on that front, and if they're able to draw audiences to Epic Games Store that way. For me, for my part, these numbers aren't confidence-inspiring, and Apple's breakdown certainly isn't confidence-inspiring, though that may just be Apple trying to get legal headway by exaggerating how bad these numbers are. But on the other side of that coin, Tim Sweeney, being the CEO of Epic, of course he would go out of his way to paint everything surrounding Epic on a positive light with an optimistic outlook, because that's just what executives are supposed to do to try to garner the confidence of investors and customers and whatnot. But I've also seen plenty of times where corporations and executives have lied about their optimistic outlook. Stadia being a major example of a company that kept saying, oh, the future is bright and all of these things, and recently they shut down all of their first-party studios and things are looking worse than ever. Regardless, I think many will agree that Epic Games Store is still facing an uphill battle. Epic still has quite a ways to go and a lot of work to do before people start considering Epic Games Store to be a serious competitor to Steam and not just somewhere to log in for a free game every once in a while. And the free games are great, don't get me wrong, and the developer cut that they give out, great. You know, not everything is bad about Epic Games Store, but on the customer side of things, it's just not good enough. But that's just one man's take on everything. Let me know in the comments below what your outlook is for Epic Games Store. Do you think that this endeavor will eventually become profitable? Do you think Epic Games Store will become a serious competitor to Steam, overtake it somewhere in the distant future or in the near future? What's your general take on where Epic Games Store currently stands and the stats shared by Tim Sweeney and Apple about the losses that Epic Games Store is incurring in its early years as it tries to build up to be a profitable business? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.